Now let's look at comparing mutual funds. When you're comparing mutual funds, it's important to compare apples with apples. And I guess what I'm trying to say is compare mutual funds that are very similar in nature. So things that we would compare is the investment objective. A growth fund should be compared to other growth funds. A money market fund should be compared to other money market funds. So it's important to compare like funds. Also, we're going to do investment policies. There's different investment policies that we want to compare and see how the policies match up with each other. And the quality of the management. A lot of times you're going to look and see what the investment advisor's history has been and how their quality is and how they compare with the other fund. Risk factors. Want to compare with the risk factors. Some funds might be taking more risk than other funds, even if they're in the same category. They're both growth funds, but one might be more of an aggressive growth fund. Portfolio turnover. When we're turning over a portfolio, how often are they doing that? Some are more apt to be turned over. For example, money market funds turn over relatively regularly because the investments inside the money market fund are actually short-term investments, so their turnover rate is much more rapid. Same with aggressive growth. If you're looking at aggressive growth funds with another aggressive growth, they actually turn their portfolio because a lot of times they'll use cyclical investments. Next, we're going to compare total return. It's important when computing total return that we include the dividends and the capital gains. So if they ever talk yield in a question, that's only the annual income, which is derived from the dividend. If they're talking total return, you actually have to include the capital gains. So comparing funds by comparing their total return is another way to see which investment you'd want to invest in as an investor. Next, the expense ratio. Some funds naturally have a higher expense ratio. For example, an index fund generally has a very low expense ratio because there's not a whole lot to manage. They simply mirror the index. But you would want to compare an index fund with another index fund. Once again, comparing apples with apples. Jim, did you have any comments on this?
Yes, Dee, just briefly, again, regarding the expense ratio, the expense component of that ratio, the management expense is the largest single expense in the fund. And also remember, the expense ratio can also reflect turnover.